I stood by the floor-to-ceiling window of my downtown apartment, the city lights reflecting off the polished wood floors, and tried to steady my racing heart. My silk blouse felt impossibly tight, or maybe it was just the tension coiling inside me. The notification buzz from my phone broke the silence, and I froze. A single message from Mom. "You're not family, Emily. Don't show up tonight." I had rehearsed this evening in my mind 1,000 times. Dad's party, the gathering where everyone would celebrate the milestones of my siblings and cousins, and where I, apparently, didn't belong. The words stung, sharper than I expected, but beneath the hurt, a small spark of determination ignited. They didn't know the truth. They had no idea how far I'd come, what I'd built in the shadows while they doubted me. I could feel the cool breeze from the open balcony brush against my skin, carrying the distant hum of traffic and laughter from the streets below. My hands tightened around the glass of wine I hadn't even touched yet. I allowed myself a wry, almost ironic smile. Let them expect the struggling daughter, the one they dismissed. Tonight, they would meet someone else entirely. Someone they wouldn't recognize, yet someone they couldn't ignore. And for the first time in years, I felt the thrill of owning my story, of finally stepping into the truth they never saw coming. I remember the last time I felt truly invisible in my own family. I was 22, freshly graduated, full of hope but trembling with uncertainty. Dad had insisted on a family discussion at our old house in New Jersey, and Mom sat there with that cool, sharp look that always made my stomach knot. "You're not really part of this family, Emily," she had said, her voice calm but cutting. "We've tried to include you, but you'll never fit in." I felt my hands clench into fists under the table. My throat tightened, a lump forming that made it impossible to speak. The words echoed in my head, louder than the soft clink of silverware or the distant laughter of my younger cousins. My heart ached, not from disbelief, but from the sting of rejection that came from the people who were supposed to love me unconditionally. I looked down at the bracelet my grandmother had given me on my 18th birthday, a small, delicate chain with a single sapphire charm. "Always remember," she had whispered, "your worth is never defined by those who fail to see it." I clutched it tightly, letting her words anchor me, even as my family dismissed me. That night, I walked out into the crisp autumn air, leaves crunching under my boots, and made a decision. No one would dictate my value, my future, or my dreams ever again. I would leave the doubts behind and build a life that didn't depend on their approval. It wasn't easy. I rented a tiny apartment, took odd jobs, and learned every skill I could about the industry I loved. But every time I felt the sting of loneliness or self-doubt, I held onto that bracelet and my grandmother's words. They reminded me that the pain of being dismissed could be transformed into the fuel I needed to create something extraordinary, something they would never see coming. By the time I hung up my coat that night and closed the door behind me, I wasn't just walking away from their words. I was stepping into a new version of myself, the one who wouldn't just survive, but thrive. I started small. My first apartment in Chicago was a cramped studio with peeling paint and a view of a brick wall, but to me, it felt like a palace. Every morning, I brewed coffee and traced my fingers over the edges of my grandmother's sapphire bracelet, letting her words guide me. "Your worth is never defined by those who fail to see it." I whispered them like a mantra before heading out into a world that had no idea I existed. It wasn't glamorous. I worked long nights as an assistant in a small marketing firm, often the only woman in the room, learning fast how to navigate the subtle dismissals and unspoken rules of corporate life. There were moments I doubted myself, times I cried in the bathroom after being overlooked for projects or belittled by colleagues, but I never gave up. Every challenge became a stepping stone. Every setback a lesson. Then came Maria, a senior creative director at a boutique agency, who noticed something in me that no one else did. "You have vision, Emily," she said one evening over late-night brainstorming sessions. "Don't shrink yourself for anyone. Build it, claim it, and don't tell them until you're ready." Her words were the confirmation I didn't know I needed. I soaked up her guidance, learning everything from campaign strategy to client negotiation, and slowly, carefully, I started carving out a space for myself. My first big win came 6 months later. A struggling local brand needed a complete rebranding, and Maria insisted I lead the project. I poured my heart into it, late nights, endless revisions, calls with vendors at all hours. When the campaign launched, it was an instant success, turning the small company into a regional sensation. That first victory tasted like freedom. From there, momentum built quietly but steadily. I signed my first high-paying client, then another and another, carefully reinvesting my earnings into my own ventures. I avoided flaunting my achievements online, posting only modest updates or curated snapshots, while secretly building an empire that was far beyond anything my family could have imagined. By the time I had enough to purchase my own office downtown, complete with original artwork and floor-to-ceiling windows, I was no longer just surviving. I was thriving. The Emily they thought they knew, the one dismissed as not family, had become a force they could never anticipate. I had mastered the delicate art of success in silence, letting my work speak for me, while the sting of past rejection remained a quiet, persistent motivator. Every email, every contract signed, every milestone achieved was a silent promise to myself. I would not just prove them wrong, I would become someone they couldn't ignore. And all along, that sapphire bracelet lay on my desk, a small but constant reminder that my worth had never been theirs to define. The invitation was subtle, almost casual, Dad's annual party at the mansion on the outskirts of New Jersey. I had RSVP'd reluctantly, knowing full well the whispers and judgment that would greet me. But this time, I wasn't the girl hiding in the shadows, shrinking from their opinions. I was Emily, the Emily they had never seen, the Emily who had built everything on her own. When I arrived, the valet barely glanced at me, handing over my car keys with a polite nod. I stepped into the grand hall, the chandelier light glinting off the marble floors, and felt the familiar pang of tension. Conversations paused, glances flicked toward me, and for a moment, the room held its collective breath. Mom was the first to notice. Her lips pressed into a thin line, her eyes narrowing as if she were trying to recall a stranger's face. "Emily," she said, voice tight, "you came?" I smiled, serene and controlled. "I did," I replied softly, letting my eyes take in every detail. The massive floral arrangements, the polished silver trays, the familiar laughter. It all seemed both comforting and alien. But this time, I wasn't the girl seeking approval. I was the woman who had nothing to prove. I led them to my office space in the mansion's newly renovated wing, a place they'd never been invited to see. It was adorned with original art, sleek furniture, and subtle personal touches, awards I had quietly won, framed photos of campaigns that had transformed local businesses, and the sapphire bracelet resting on my desk, catching the light. "Welcome," I said, gesturing for them to sit. They hesitated, exchanging uncertain glances. Dad's mouth opened, closed, opened again. My younger brother's jaw was tight, his eyes wide. And Mom, she just stared, the words she had used to wound me in the past lodged somewhere deep in her throat. I let the silence stretch, letting them absorb the space, the aura of someone who had arrived entirely on her own terms. And then, slowly, I revealed the truth. "I know you think I'm not family," I began, voice calm, unwavering. "You think I don't belong, that I haven't built anything for myself. But the truth is, everything you see here, everything I've achieved, I've done on my own. The companies I've launched, the clients I've signed, the ventures I've built, they are all mine. I am financially independent, I own my business outright, and I have more than enough to live the life I've always dreamed of. And the best part? I never had to ask for your approval to do it." The room went silent. Dad's eyes softened, guilt flashing briefly before he blinked it away. Mom's lips trembled, and she looked away, unable to meet my gaze. My brother's pride clashed with disbelief. For the first time, they saw me not as the struggling daughter they had dismissed, but as the woman they had underestimated. I smiled, letting the truth settle over them like a tide they could neither stop nor deny. Their shock, their shame, their awe, it was mine to witness, mine to hold, just as it had been theirs to give me all those years ago. And in that moment, I realized how far I had truly come. I wasn't seeking vengeance, only recognition of what I had always known. My worth had never been defined by them, and now, finally, they could see it. I leaned back in the sleek leather chair, watching them carefully. The shock had faded into something else, a mixture of awe, guilt, and curiosity. For the first time in years, I held the power. The power to decide whether they could remain part of my life on my terms, or whether the door they had slammed in my face years ago would stay firmly closed. "Let's be clear," I said, my voice calm but firm. "I'm not here to punish you. But I also won't let old patterns dictate how I engage with any of you." Mom shifted uncomfortably, the corners of her mouth twitching. "Emily," she began, but I raised a hand. "I will lay out conditions," I continued. "Conditions that must be met if you want to be part of my world from this point forward. First, Dad." I looked at him, seeing the man who had quietly supported me when no one else did, but had been silenced by Mom's judgment. "You need to stop prioritizing appearances over truth. Support me not because it's convenient, but because you believe in me genuinely. No more choosing what's socially acceptable over what's right." Then Mom. Her shoulders slumped slightly, and I softened. Just enough. "You need to let go of your judgment, your comparisons, and your insistence on control. If you want a relationship with me, you'll respect my independence. You will acknowledge me as an equal, not just your daughter, but a woman who has earned her place in this world." To my brother, I offered a small, knowing smile. "You've always been competitive, and that's fine. But I won't tolerate undermining or belittling. You'll support, not sabotage. And if you choose to grow, I will help you, but only if you're willing to put in the work." I could feel the weight of the conditions in the room, the tension mixed with hope. My voice softened just slightly. "These aren't punishments. They're opportunities. Opportunities for us to build relationships based on respect, not entitlement, on growth, not resentment." They nodded, tentative but receptive, because for the first time, the Emily they had dismissed was standing strong, compassionate yet unyielding. I wasn't asking for blind forgiveness. I was demanding a new standard, one that protected my journey and encouraged theirs. And as I spoke, I felt a sense of relief washing over me. I wasn't just reclaiming my life. I was offering them a chance to reclaim theirs in a healthier way. This power, this control, wasn't about ego. It was about boundaries, fairness, and the respect every woman deserves, especially from the people who once tried to define her worth. By the time the conversation ended, the energy in the room had shifted. They were no longer simply family. They were participants in a new dynamic, one that could only work if they honored my terms. And for the first time, I felt fully, undeniably, unshakably in control of my own story. In the days that followed, I watched the subtle shifts take place. Dad started making small gestures of genuine support, checking in on my projects, celebrating milestones without expectation. Mom, though still hesitant, made the effort to ask questions without judgment, her words tinged with curiosity rather than criticism. Even my brother began to approach me with a cautious respect, no longer competing but seeking advice, eager to learn from the journey I had fought so hard to build. Sitting in my office one morning, the sunlight catching the sapphire in my grandmother's bracelet, I allowed myself a quiet moment of reflection. The pain of rejection, the nights spent doubting myself, the sting of her words, it all felt distant now, replaced by a profound sense of strength. Every struggle had been a step toward this version of me, resilient, accomplished, and unapologetically independent. I reached for the bracelet, running my fingers over its smooth edges. It had witnessed my despair, my triumphs, my persistence. A tangible reminder that my worth had never depended on anyone else's approval, only on the courage I had summoned to claim it. The relationships I valued most now were those built on honesty, respect, and mutual growth. I had learned to discern who deserved my time and energy and who did not. The power dynamics had shifted, not through revenge, but through quiet, undeniable success and unwavering boundaries. And as I looked out over the city skyline, the lights sparkling like tiny affirmations of possibility, I smiled to myself. The Emily who had been told she didn't belong had become a woman who could define her own place in the world. Strong, graceful, and entirely unafraid of being seen. Because in the end, family isn't just about blood. It's about respect, love, and the willingness to grow together. And I had made sure of one thing: I would never settle for less than that, ever again. Bottom of form.